So what do the U.S. Supreme Court and your dog's dinner have in common? Turns out a whole lot more than you'd ever think. The highest court in the land recently dealt with a case that wasn't about some huge constitutional debate. Nope, it was about what's actually in a bag of premium dog food. So how on earth did a fight over kibble make its way to the 9 most powerful judges in the country? Let's dig into the case of Royal Canin versus Wullschleger.
All right, so our story begins not in some fancy courtroom, but with a pet owner named Anastasia Wullschleger. She's buying this Royal Canin dog food, the kind you need a vet's prescription for. She figured that meant it had some kind of special medicine in it for her dog, but when she came to believe it didn't, well, that's when she filed a lawsuit that would end up having ripples that went all the way to the top.
So here's the core of the fight. Wullschleger's argument was pretty simple. She claimed Royal Canin was just slapping a prescription label on their bags to justify a super high price for what was, in her view, just regular dog food. But Royal Canin stood their ground, saying, no, our product is a special formula, and it absolutely requires a vet's oversight. The stage was set for a real David versus Goliath, consumer versus corporation kind of showdown.
Now, Wullschleger started this whole thing in her local Missouri state court. She was focused on Missouri laws about merchandising and antitrust stuff. But, and this is the part that changes everything, she added one more ingredient into the mix, a claim that Royal Canin violated a federal law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That one single federal claim, it was about to change the entire game.
And just like that, a legal tug-of-war kicked off over where this case should even be heard. Because Wullschleger had that one federal claim, Royal Canin pounced. They were able to remove the entire lawsuit from state court and pull it up into federal court. They basically changed the stadium where the game was being played. But Wullschleger didn't want to play on their turf, so she made a really slick move. She amended her lawsuit and just deleted the federal claim. Poof! Gone. With only the state-level issues left, she asked the judge to remand it, which is just a fancy way of saying send it back down to Missouri State Court.
Okay, so to really get what's happening next, we've got to wrap our heads around this key legal idea, supplemental jurisdiction. Think of it like this. A federal claim is like a massive, heavy anchor that you drop in federal court. And that anchor is so powerful, it can actually pull all the related state law claims right into federal court along with it, even the claims that a federal judge normally wouldn't touch.
And that brings us right to the central puzzle that the Supreme Court had to solve. Remember, Wullschleger had just strategically pulled up her federal anchor by changing her complaint. So the huge question was, once that anchor is gone, does the federal court have to let go of the rest of the case, or can it somehow still hold on to those state law claims?
As you can imagine, the two sides had totally different takes on this. Royal Canin argued that jurisdiction gets determined the second the case lands in federal court. It's locked in, they said, and it doesn't matter what the plaintiff does after that. But Wullschleger's team fired back, saying jurisdiction isn't a one-and-done thing. It has to be based on the lawsuit as it exists right now. And if the active complaint doesn't have a federal claim anymore, well then the whole reason for being in federal court has just evaporated.
So what did the Supreme Court decide? Well, their answer was about as clear as it gets. Justice Kagan, writing for the court, laid it out perfectly. When an amendment excises the federal law claims that enabled removal, the federal court loses its supplemental jurisdiction over the related state law claims. And then the knockout punch. The case must therefore return to state court. Simple as that. The anchor's gone, so the case has to go back home.
And get this. How divided was the court on this tricky legal question? Not one bit. The decision was a rare, powerful 9-0. The entire court, from one end of the ideological spectrum to the other, completely agreed. You know, that kind of unanimous ruling sends a really loud message about how clear they thought the answer was.
So why was everyone on the same page? Well, the logic is actually pretty straightforward. When a plaintiff files an amended complaint, that new document completely replaces or supersedes the original one. For all legal purposes, the first lawsuit doesn't even exist anymore. So the court has to figure out its jurisdiction based only on the new active complaint. And if that complaint doesn't have that federal anchor, well, there's nothing left to keep the case in federal court.
So, okay, we get it. It's a dog food case. But why does this actually matter in the real world? Well, first, it's a huge boost for plaintiff power. It reaffirms this core idea that the person suing is the master of their complaint, giving them a ton of control over where they get to fight their battle. Second, it creates one clear, simple rule for all federal courts, which cleans up a lot of legal mess and confusion. And finally, it shows a real respect for state courts. It's basically the Supreme Court saying that when a case is purely about state law, it belongs in front of a state judge.
But this ruling leaves us with one big lingering question, doesn't it? Does this give plaintiffs a little too much power to play games with the system? To strategically manipulate which court gets to hear their case? It almost seems like they could use a federal claim as a temporary bargaining chip, only to toss it aside later. The court has definitely made the rule clear, but the debate over the strategic balance of power in our legal system, well, that is far from over.